Well, good morning. And thank you so much for coming to this session, for being with us both in person and online to continue this amazing legacy of the Festival of Faiths, which I've only gotten to participate in for the last couple of years, but I'm so glad that I've been drawn into this circle. We have three fantastic speakers this morning in Lyanda, Lynn, Haupt, Silas House, and Mojgani, all of whom have given me inspiration long before we met in person. I know you'll be grateful for their presence here today. They will help us see that inspiration for growth, creativity, and resilience can be found in varied and often surprising places, even in dark times. And aren't we all hungry for inspiration today? Or if we're not, shouldn't we be? Sacred inspiration has an important prerequisite of cultivating an attitude of awe and wonder toward what we perceive in the world. Philosophers and mystics of various traditions talk about our capacity for awe as the loftiest, but also the most universally human capacity. Barbara Brown Taylor calls it the proper attitude of a small and curious human being in a vast and fascinating world of experience. This definition sounds basic, but there is a challenge in it too. In order to experience awe and wonder, we must first admit that relative to the mystery of reality, we are indeed small and curious, while the world is vast and fascinating. This admission might seem difficult today, since many of us imagine the material world as disenchanted and mechanical, fully explainable by human reason. Carolyn Merchant says we are at the culmination of a process through which we banished mystery from our imaginations and adopted cold mathematical logic as the sole arbiter of truth. Even if we personally don't know all of reality's logical workings, many of us have been captured by this imagination, which implies that life ultimately cannot surprise even our reverent attention. In a disenchanted world, you see, awe becomes something merely sentimental as opposed to realistic. As a reaction to the explanatory power of reason, some modern forms of religion have become just as reductionistic in their appeals to faith. Sometimes it feels to me like it's Richard Dawkins versus Ken Ham all the way down, where the parties agree on nothing except that everything in reality fits into a neatly defined category. Imaginations like Excel spreadsheets. Poets will find few friends at either party, unfortunately. We should be grateful then that honest scientists and people of faith alike admit that we don't actually know everything, and therefore we are not sufficiently powerful to banish mystery from this world. This disenchanted imagination has been our choice, but it is not our fate. The real challenge we must face in order to be inspired is thus a moral one. Are we willing to humble ourselves in the face of not knowing and before the mysteries of other creatures, large and small? Cole Arthur Riley says, "Children are made of awe. We have much to learn from them, but we seldom do." And why not? Perhaps as much as we long to reclaim the awe of our child selves, we are too caught up in a pretend maturity that makes it embarrassing to be in awe of anything, at least in front of other adults. What a shame. Because in looking down on childlike awe, we save face but forget the deepest source of our own dignity. In sacred awe, we are part of the story, Riley insists. We need this deeper story, which is why we need thinkers and writers who remind us that ordinary light entering a dark house through a particular window can be experienced as loving, or that the face of our beloved looks like an ocean agate glowing. Those are both lines from Anissa's poems. In the wake of last week's presidential election, I think it's also important to notice that developing a capacity for awe and wonder or failing to do so has profound moral consequences. As Taylor also says, an irreverent soul who is unable to feel awe in the presence of things higher than the self is also unable to feel respect in the presence of things it sees as lower than the self. This raises real questions about leaders, especially religious leaders, who cite reverence for what is good as their warrant for proclaiming whole populations of people evil. People who become targets of irreverent leaders and their followers are described by Howard Thurman as the disinherited. Throughout this country's history, the disinherited have found in awe a source of dignity that transcends the proclamations of the powerful. The contemptuous disregard for personhood is the fact that is degrading, Thurman explains. But he also trusts that such degradation is countered by awe. And as a young boy, Thurman once observed Halley's Comet with his mother. "I shall never forget it if I live forever," he writes. "My mother stood with me, her hand resting on my shoulder, while I, in utter speechless awe, beheld the great spectacle with its fan of light spreading across the heavens." To witness such a thing is to know oneself as part of a deeper story, one that exposes the arbitrariness of degradation by the status quo. It is to know oneself in the fullness of one's dignity. To the degree to which a man knows this, Thurman writes, he is unconquerable from within and without. But, of course, we can't leave it up to the disinherited to find the deeper story. Those of us who are less at risk must also practice looking up. We might already think we are acquainted with beauty, but our wonder is a lie if it does not illuminate the dignity of our fellow human beings. Riley explains, to be able to marvel at the face of our neighbor with the same awe we have for the mountaintop, the sunlight refracting, this manner of vision is what will keep us from destroying each other. Wonder and awe, then, the preconditions of sacred inspiration, are universally available yet demanding, lofty yet necessary for our individual and collective sanity. Our three speakers will immerse us in their challenges and gifts. I invite you to pay attention. I'm now going to introduce the first speaker, Lyanda Lynn Haupt. Lyanda is an award-winning author, naturalist, eco-philosopher, and speaker whose work explores the beautiful, complicated connections between humans and the wild natural world. A Seattle-based writer, she is acclaimed for combining scientific knowledge with literary poetic prose. Lyanda's work is grounded in observation and interweaves personal experience with science, myth, spirit, craft, and art. She's written 6 books. The latest, Rooted: Life at the Crossroads of Science, Nature, and Spirit, came out in 2021. She is a winner of the Sigurd Olsen Nature Writing Award, the Nautilus Book Award, a finalist for the Orion Book Award, and a 2-time winner of the Washington State Book Award, where she just came from last night, quite late, but she's here. In addition, Lyanda has created and directed educational programs for Seattle Audubon, worked in raptor rehabilitation in Vermont, and as a seabird researcher for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the remote tropical Pacific. Please give a warm welcome to Lyanda Lynn Haupt.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. So I was raised Catholic. And when I was in 4th grade, I ran out one Easter morning to see what the bunny had brought. And I looked in my basket, and there, next to the chocolate rabbit, where my sister got a softball mitt, I got, somehow, The Story of a Soul, the autobiography of Therese of Lisieux. I am not sure what my parents were thinking, but I devoured the words of this young woman. She was so fervent, so ecstatic, so neurotic. She was also a Capricorn like me, though I'm pretty sure she didn't know that. One morning, when she was out in her cloistered garden as a Carmelite, she saw a chicken, a little mother chicken, who had her wings out over her young. And in that moment, she had one of those kind of conversions where she felt the sacred in the presence of all things, in all of life. And after learning about her, I was really inspired to take up the study of other nature mystics, so I didn't have that language for them yet. People in many traditions, but people like Francis of Assisi and Hildegard of Bingen, Julian of Norwich. These are people who didn't pay much attention to what culture thought they should do or what their families thought they should do. They shed their shoes. They lived in caves, real and metaphorical. They spoke with sparrows. They baked bread in clay ovens, took wild nettles and macerated it into healing salve. They bowed to ravens and listened to wolves and knelt before trees, and they called all of these things holy. And from them, I learned the most important thing that I know about creative life. From them, we can come to understand that we are able to be conversant with the sacred earth in strange and wild and imaginative ways, in any way we want, but not in the way that the culture tells us, but in the way that we are called. And this matters so tremendously today, in this difficult, troubled time on earth, in this aftermath of the election. And I'm not going to go through the litany. We all know on this lovely Friday morning, I'm not going to go deeply into ecological crisis and political crisis and all of our personal troubles as well. And on top of it all, my cat just died. Delilah, I know. And I know you have your version of that too. And I speak in my work to so many people of all different ages, and the question in light of all that I hear over and over again is the same one. Given all of this, given the overwhelm that we feel in light of it, the paralysis we feel, we have this white-knuckled kind of grip on the edge of our chair on one another that, we want to do something, but what is it? The question is, what do? I hear it over and over. How do I live? How do I live? And the problem when someone asks that of you, even though it is the question of our lives and our time, the question is when someone asks it of you is that there is no one right answer, right? The answer for each individual comes from our own nobility, our own genius, our own authenticity, our own wild imaginings. And yet here we are in this culture that contrives at every turn to separate us from the stillness and the kind of listening that will allow us to know that for ourselves. The fragmentation that we know in so many ways, the media, of course, our devices, of course, but also the environments in which we live. Rick Rubin, wonderful record producer, produced everyone from Def Leppard to Brandy Carlisle, right? He's got great wild gray hair. He's cooler than all of us. For me, for sure. He said, it is in nature that we come to know our nature. It's in nature that we come to know our nature. We as a species have spent over 99.9% of our evolutionary history outside of the built environment. It doesn't mean humans always had, and hominids always had an easy life. It wasn't idyllic, but it was what we were adapted to, right? Over 99% of our life. All of a sudden, in this brief little blip in evolutionary time, we spend 93% of our lives indoors and in cars. And the majority of the remaining 7% we spend walking between our houses and our cars. Our buildings and our cars. So it's what is called, there's a syndrome for it. There's a name for this dysphoria that we rightly feel. It's called evolutionary mismatch syndrome. The world has evolved or changed so fast, but we are not able to be adapted to it. So we walk in this troubled time also with these psyches and these bodies that are just kind of going, what's going on? What's going on? How do we listen for the answer to that question? How do I live? A few years ago, I started having this recurring dream. And it happened 3 nights in a row, and then it took a break, and then it happened again. I was walking through the woods, and I was wearing a red hood. We know this story. Okay. And I thought, well, I want to listen to my dreams. I'm going to find out more about this. So I explored all the art about the tale of Little Red and the wolf, and I read all of the academic papers that were interpreting this mythology. And there's one consensus that rose from everything that I studied. It's the idea that the wolf is a predator in the archetypal, like the Jungian archetypal sense. Archetypal predator, that which at some point leads us off of our intended path. It is this wolf that we are to learn to recognize and avoid in our maturation into adults. And I thought, okay, I can see that. But I started to read the tale in a different way. Now, when the wolf leads Little Red off into the woods, into the wilderness, he sets her a task, remember? He sets her a task, something to occupy her time, so he can go to the grandmother's house and eat her up. The task is picking wildflowers. Now, when she shows up at the grandmother's house, and think about that, that's the wise elder, the woman who lives in her deepest authenticity. That is the house of creative imagining. When she shows up there, she's not just going to have this dumb basket of muffins that her mom made. She's going to have these wildflowers that drew her heart, that drew her spirit. And she's going to make her own way there, not by the well-trodden path, but she was dropped right into that line that we hear so often from the Spanish mystic poet Antonio Machado. Walker, there is no road. She inhabited that line, and without fear, she followed her intuition, her inner knowing. She listened to the whisperings of trees and the songs of birds and the winds overhead, and she made her own authentic way to that house of wild creative imagining. And when she got there, yes, she was eaten by the wolf, as her grandmother was before her. But it turns out that they're perfectly well, right? They emerge exhilarated. They set those wildflowers on the table, and they feast together with an exquisite new hunger. Yeah. Who wants the well-trodden road when we can have secret flowers and visits from the unexpected feral wolf of our imaginations? How do we get on that path? How do we get on the wolf path? I got a clue from a friend of mine who's a monastic. He's been a Benedictine for most of his life, for 3 decades. And I asked him one day, I said, can you tell me something about your profession of vows? Because that's a wild thing to do. Do you wear special clothes? Are there lots of candles? Are there presents? And he said, Lyanda, you commoner, I cannot tell you. It is top secret. But after a couple glasses of wine, he told me one thing. He said, there is a moment in the profession when each pontificant is asked, will you do this? Will you do this? Will you live this life of wilderness with no certainty, where you are called to stay in this community of earth where we all live, this community, and at the same time be called to a personal conversion over and over to your own wild imaginings? Will you? And the answer is not yes, and it's not no. The answer to will you take on this life is an ancient Latin word. The word is ad sum, and it means I am here. I am here. And my invitation to all of us, when we're seeking a way to find that connection back to the wolf path, back to the sense of natural connection that we so desperately need for our own authentic wild imaginings. This is what Hildegard of Bingen, she said, when we are away from the lush green landscape, we become shriveled and wilted. I don't want to be shriveled or wilted. Thomas Merton, who's so close to where we gather today, said, when we are away from the trees, when we are away from the forest, we fail the trees and ourselves. We are absent from the wedding feast. The wedding feast, of course, that great participation that we're talking about together this weekend. My invitation for a simple practice, and it's the foundational practice, it's become the foundational practice for my own work, is to take some time every single day and go outdoors insofar as you can. If you can take off your shoes and connect directly with the soil or place your hands on the tree, that is wonderful. If you can get farther into the woods, that is beautiful. But if you can't, that's okay too. When we step out into the world, we are in the presence of the cycles, the rhythms of nature, just by virtue of the wind and the skies and the weather that surrounds us, right? Yeah. So take a step outside of this built environment with your hands open, Your hands open in this universal mudra of simultaneous oblation, offering, and reception, receiving. And just say those words. I am here. I am here. What are we listening for? Our own verse, our own gift, our own imaginings, our own charism, our own ad sum. Yeah. When we step out in this silence, in this attitude of listening and beholding, it is in these moments that we can listen for and receive the gifts of the wild earth. And in this troubled time, in this wild, beloved, imperiled earth that we love so much, we can offer our wildest imaginings in return. Thank you. Thank you.
So, thank you so much for that. Before I introduce the next speaker, I just wanted to say one of the things that kind of strikes me about, or that actually has surprised me in reading your stuff, is that you have the saints who, in modern religious terms, are sometimes used as examples almost of like an otherworldly holiness. But the way that you have encountered them and the way that you sort of clarify for it, they were really wild weirdos, a lot of them, right? Like in a good way, right? Like they're not actually, like I think if St. Francis walked into a church, they'd probably try and kick him out, he's not, so anyway, just an interesting thing about holiness and that willingness to be wild that I hope we can talk about some more too. Yeah. So our next speaker in Kentucky needs not much of an introduction, I don't think, but I'm going to introduce him anyway. Silas House is a best-selling author whose works include several novels, most recently Lark Ascending, 3 plays, and a book of creative nonfiction. Lark Ascending won the 2023 Southern Book Prize in Fiction and was chosen as a Booklist Editor's Choice, one of Salon's Books of the Year, and as a top 10 most recommended book by independent booksellers. Silas was chosen for the Duggins Prize, the nation's largest award for an LGBT writer, and in 2020 was chosen as Appalachian of the Year in a nationwide poll. He is a member of the Fellowship of Southern Writers and recipient of 3 honorary doctorates. He serves as the NEH Chair of Appalachian Studies at Berea College on the faculty at Spalding University's School of Creative Writing and as an editor for the University Press of Kentucky. He's a former commentator for NPR's All Things Considered, and his writing has appeared recently in Time, The Atlantic, Garden and Gun, and Oxford American. Silas was a producer and one of the subjects of the award-winning documentary Hillbilly, and as a music journalist, he's worked with artists such as Casey Musgraves, Chris Christopherson, Lucinda Williams, and Jason Isbell. Please give Silas a warm welcome.
Let's see if I can get my slideshow here. Good morning. Thank you all so much for being here. I'm so glad to be here. I believe I'm a writer for many reasons. Because I was raised among a community of storytellers, because I was raised in my aunt's little community store where everyone came in and told stories, because I witnessed my family falling apart after the murder of my uncle and saw that stories needed to be written down to survive properly. Because I was raised in a community and family of strong faith. And so I'll focus on that last one this morning. I've had an unexplainable faith for as long as I can remember. And I had a profound relationship with God from a very early age. Once, as a child, I was convinced that God was speaking to me. I was in my backyard playing on my metal swing set by myself. I spent lots of time alone by choice, sometimes not by choice. As I was swinging, a big wind came down the valley, and I was certain that this was God passing through. And I believe I heard God speak to me. "I am here," the wind said. In that moment, I needed someone there with me. I had felt very alone, but suddenly I was with someone. Instead of telling somebody this had happened, I ran into the house and got out my little notebook where I wrote down everything. So you'll note here that being outside led me to going in to write. Very similar to what you were saying. The natural world has always been my deepest spiritual connection, and being outside has always been my greatest impetus for creation, for writing. Lots of artists I know have had similar experiences. Perhaps some of us are artists because of our strict fundamentalist upbringings, and our wildly creative minds led to these encounters. Maybe as writers, we were doing what writers and artists are supposed to do. Hearing like an animal, seeing like a camera, feeling everything intensely, like an animal does. For this is the artist's great responsibility, to listen, see, feel, smell, taste like an animal, to experience everything as intensely as possible, and then to report our findings to others. I want to pause here briefly to tell you that I'm immediately suspicious whenever anyone tells me that God has spoken to them and told them to do something. A whole lot of evil in the world has been framed this way. I was a child raised in a very strict evangelical fundamentalist church. But the point is that in my time of feeling alone, I felt as if someone was there. I also want to say that while I do identify as a Christian, I am often troubled by the way a lot of mainstream Christians act these days. I feel that my religion has been hijacked by a vocal, obnoxious lot who have politicized and even bastardized Christianity, turning it more towards nationalism than anything else. So often it does not reflect the values of Christ as I was taught. So more and more I call myself a person of faith instead. And this makes me want to explore issues like faith and religion and doubt even more in my writing, because we must never operate in a world of absolutes. More and more I think that we do. We put people in the category of saint and some in the category of monster, and that's that. Art must be the antithesis of that. Art has to explore the gray in between, the complexity. That's where the complexity lives, and the humanity. So art must never be absolutist. Art must insist on examining the complications of human beings and the world. Art is about the mystery, the wonder, and the awe. And that's why art is more important than ever, I believe. Because when we see people we love defending politicians who truck in fascism, we are tempted to be absolutists just as they are. It would all be so much easier if the people we disagree with were monsters. But the truth is usually that the people we disagree with the most vehemently on values are the ones we love and the ones we know to love us. That's what makes it more difficult. If they were all just monsters, we could just put them out of our lives and move on, and that'd be it. There would be no heartache about it. But there is heartache. That's the problem. For me, art has been a balm for that sadness, but it has also helped me to find some solutions. Because empathy lives in books and poems. That does not mean that this isn't sometimes a struggle. Sometimes it's difficult for me to find the sacredness that exists in people vomiting hatred. But I believe in landing on love, even when people seek to harm me. So I've had to learn sometimes to love from afar. I've had to learn how to recognize the sacred parts of them while also issuing boundaries. I've had to learn that removing myself from situations does not mean I'm no longer the peacemaker. I've had to learn that it's not always fair to be the one put in the situation of being the bigger person when the other one is simply being mean-hearted. I want to love everyone, but that does not mean I have to be a doormat. And again, I turn to literature to help me with this. I appreciate a quote by the great writer Robert Jones Jr. that helps me to articulate my feelings on this the best. And he once wrote, "We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right to exist." A passage from a novel that has been foundational for me is this one, from Marilyn Robinson's masterpiece, Gilead. I'm sure many of you know it. I hope you do. In Gilead, Robinson writes, "For me, writing has always felt like praying. You feel as if someone is there." And perhaps this is another reason I write, because I fear being alone, because I have a story to tell and I want others to hear it, not just myself. One of my favorite writers is Willa Cather, and she once wrote, "The prayers of all good people are good." This quote is somewhat of a mystery to me, but when thought on, I believe that one thing Cather's saying here is that anyone who strives to be good is therefore good. I also believe that one of the many functions of art is to make us better people. The act of making art makes us better people. The act of looking at, reading, hearing, experiencing art has the potential to make us better if we open ourselves up to it. And this could come in the form of books, music, paintings, films, a dance recital, many things. For me, it's always been literature. Art, by illuminating the truth, sheds light on how we can be better people. Nearly everything I ever learned about being a better person, I didn't learn in church. I learned from secular work, from secular books and poems. I'm thinking of novels like The Color Purple by Alice Walker, which taught me that the true path to God is to recognize that I may have the God of understanding and that God lives in everything. In that book, Shug Avery says, everything wants to be loved. Us sing and dance, make faces, and give flower bouquets trying to be loved. People think pleasing God is all God cares about, but any fool living in the world can see he's always trying to please us back. When you walk through the world every day, noticing everything, you are honoring God. And that is what any artist must do, I think, to be a truly great artist. There's no way an artist can walk through the day without seeing, hearing, feeling, smelling, tasting, and experiencing everything they can. It is not a great leap to make this part of one's own religiosity or better spirituality. And again, I want to emphasize that God can mean many different things to many different people. For me, it's the great mystery. That's the God of my understanding. Art teaches us to give thanks. Anne Lamott, the author of books like Traveling Mercies, Bird by Bird, many others, says that the two best prayers she knows are please, 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 and thank you, thank you, thank you. I have used both of these prayers many, many times, and they have been balms for me. Art can be a way of prayerful meditation, or just prayer, period. Art can be a way of being of service. Everything we do throughout the day can be a way of service to others, because the God of my understanding lives in all of us. William Blake said, "All that lives is holy," and Thomas Merton, whose name will be conjured many times during this festival, the Trappist monk who lived just south of here at the Abbey of Gethsemane, later popularized this notion by reshaping the quote a little bit to read, "Everything that is holy." And Merton had a revelation or an epiphany right here in Louisville, just about 3 or 4 blocks away. I hope you will seek it out. There is a state historical marker there, and it's, I believe, I've read that it's the only historical marker in the United States that is about a religious experience. And so he wrote about it. At the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the center of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another even though we were total strangers. There is no way of telling people that they are walking around shining like the sun. And that is now the corner of 4th and Muhammad Ali. So we must strive to walk through the world treating everything as if it is holy, finding the awe and wonder in all of it. When we walk through our day as artists, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, smelling, everything like an animal, it is not a great leap to see that everything is holy and must be treated as such. The God of my understanding lives in everything, not just churches and chapels, not just in trees and leaves of grass and flowers, but even especially in the secular holy, as I call it, the leads of pencils, the lenses of cameras, the tips of paintbrushes, the rich alto of a singer, the curve of a sculptor's cup, in books, poems, music. The God of my understanding shows its face in the faces of my neighbors and friends, of strangers that I'm just meeting, my family members, and the people in line at the post office. The God of my understanding is hovering everywhere, waiting for us to take note of the sacred, to have awe and wonder. And for me, that has always been found most in the secular holy, in the arts. Thank you.
Thank you. I can't wait to ask a question that I think you both might be responding to later about like an animal. I really like that part of, because I actually think that one of the obstacles to experiencing awe and wonder is that we kind of overly intellectualize it. We put it only in those capacities that we as human beings do not share with other creatures, but of course we are animals. And yeah, that was very beautiful. Okay, so let me now introduce you to our third speaker, Anis Mojgani, the 10th Poet Laureate of Oregon. We've got Poets Laureate up here, guys. The 10th Poet Laureate of Oregon and two-time champion of the National Poetry Slam and winner of the International World Cup Poetry Slam, Anis Mojgani has been awarded residencies at the Vermont Studio Center, Caldera, Air Serenbe, the Bloedel Nature Reserve, the Sou'wester, and the Oregon Literary Arts Writers in the Schools program. A recipient of the Academy of American Poets Poet Laureate Fellowship, Anis has done commissions for the Getty Museum and Peabody Essex Museum, and his work has appeared on HBO, National Public Radio, and as part of the American Academy of Poets Poem a Day series. His work has also appeared in the New York Times and many magazines. Anis has performed at hundreds of universities across the U.S., festivals around the globe, and for audiences as varied as the United Nations and the House of Blues. The author of 6 books of poetry and the opera libretto for Sanctuaries, his first children's book is forthcoming from Holiday House, Neil Porter Books. His latest poetry collection is The Tigers They Let Me. Originally from New Orleans, Anis currently lives in Portland, Oregon. Please welcome Anis Mojgani to the festival stage.
Hello. Thank you, all of you. Can you all hear me good? All right. Thanks for joining us this morning. Sometimes I would lay in the garden and pretend that I was a carrot. Sometimes I would curl under the leaves and I became a head of lettuce. Sometimes I would bury my soft paws in the softer earth and I was a rabbit. Sometimes in the garden I was a rock. Sometimes 2 rocks, sometimes becoming 3 rocks. Sometimes in the garden as a rock I was picked up and held cool and smooth in a palm, or warmed by some sun from above. Sometimes in the garden as a rock, I waited hundreds of years, and it was only the wind that moved me. Sometimes I waited thousands of years, and it seemed not even the wind might touch me. Sometimes night would arrive to the garden, with a full moon glowing like the skin of an orange-skinned woman in a more orange dress, and the night would use that moon to say to me, look, You are like how I am, and see how bright my body sometimes becomes. Sometimes I wait for spring. Always I am waiting for spring, and for my love to return like it, out of the cold, and with flowers on their fingertips. Come closer. Come closer. Come into this. You are quite the beauty. If no one has ever told you that before, know that right now you are quite the beauty. There is joy in how your mouth dances with your teeth. Your smile is simply a sign of how sacred your life actually is, so step into it. Come closer. Know that whatever God might be, they asked the world around them to help them make something of worth. They woke from dreaming, scraped the soil from spaces, stuck somewhere inside themselves, made you, and were happy. You make whatever that Lord may be happy. Come into this. Come closer. Know that something softer than us, but just as holy, planted pieces of itself into our feet that we might one day dance our way back. Know that you are almost home. Come just a little bit closer. There are birds beating their wings beneath your breastplates, gentle sparrows that ache to sing. Come aching hearts. Come soldiers of joy, doormen of truth. Know that my heart was too big for my body, so I let it go. And most days this world thins me to where I'm just another cloud, forgetting another flock of swans, having shaved off so many of my corners that I have felt at home at times only in the shape of a ball, bending myself so far backwards that the song of my mother believed I was returning home. But believe me when I tell you that somehow my soul still manages to squeeze itself into very narrow spaces. Place your hand beneath your head when you sleep tonight. Perhaps you will find it there, making beauty as we sleep, making beauty as we dream, making beauty as we turn over. When we turn over in the ground, may the ghosts that we have asked our answers of do this turning, kneading us into crumbs of light and into this love thing called life. Come into it. Come, you wooden museums, gentle tigers, little giants. I see teacups upside down glowing across your grins. Your hearts are like my hands. Some days, all they do is tremble. I am like you. I am just like you. I too at times am filled with so much fear. But like a hallway must find the strength to walk through this with me, through this church of blood, bone, and muscle that is ours. There is a doorknob that glows like chance before you. Grab it, turn, and pull. Step through. Back straight, chin up, eyes open, hearts loud. Walk through this with me. Walk through this with me. Thank you. So, I love that this morning, this is the thing that we're talking about. This is the thing that we're listening about. I think for me personally, as not just, I was going to say for me as a poet, but it's not even so much me as a poet, but me as a person, wonder and awe and inspiration are a constant traveling companion through my days. Or at least I desire for them to be a constant traveling companion through my days. When I came to the space that a poem provided me, now, I don't know, 27 years ago, 30 years ago, the thing that it offered me was discovery. It offered me that which is unknown. It offered me a room to wonder inside of. I think when we are growing up in many classroom settings, so much of what we are instructed to write down on a piece of paper is offered up to us with very specific intentionality. They are assignments, And so I think we're very often shaped to move through this world with that intentionality. And that's not to say that I think intention in the world is one that is not needed. But this relationship to that which is known and concrete, I personally think is not needed. And the thing that the poem offered me was the space to step into a room where I did not know the answers. And that room, by me being inside of it and engaging with that mystery, revealed answers to me that I never would have set out to discover what they were if not stepping towards this unknown thing. And I think that in itself is something that is of great importance for us as we go through our days, go through our lives. One of the things that I love is the poet Naomi Shihab Nye. She has spoken to how poetry to her feels a very common, easy thing for humans to approach. And I'm sure there's many folks in the world who would disagree with that sentiment. But, when she speaks to that, a lot of what she's speaking to is that she said that, she feels that we as humans think in poems. And I'm inclined to agree that the brain is such a strange, weird, bizarre machine that it is analyzing and absorbing so much information around it in any given time and is communicating those things to our consciousness, to our body, to our heart. And while it's doing that, it's also being reminded of all these things that we have experienced, that a smell in the air, the light on a table, these things might suddenly trigger some memory from a year past, 5 years back, past from our childhoods. And so these things just have no filter for entering into us. And to me, that operates like a poem does. Within the space of a poem, that we move through these places where we are suddenly reminded of something that we no longer hold close to us. And, I would take it a step further that not only do I feel that we think in poems, but I think that we feel in poems. And even more than that we think and we feel in poems because we are existing inside of poems. I loved getting to hear both what my fellow panelists, that's such a weird word, shared in that, this aspect of how the world is in constant communication with us, that the world is constantly trying to engage with us. And I think that largely our task when we're moving through the world is not, this idea of inspiration. I think we hold it often as we are then inspired to make something. We are inspired to do something very, very concrete. But the world, I think, is constantly seeking to inspire us to do whatever. Inspire us to pick wildflowers. Something that seems irrelevant and insignificant, but largely isn't. Because the more that we engage with hearing whatever it is that the world is inspiring to us, the more that we are able to start seeing those things and hearing those things on a more regular basis. It's very interesting to me how, as children, we are often seen as being in a chapter of wonder, in a chapter of awe. And that's largely because the world as we know it is not yet fully understood and not yet fully formed. And we are then told that we arrive at a certain age in which the world is fully formed and the world is fully understood, even though the reality of that is so far from true. And so, I think it's very, very important, at least for me, in my day-to-day existence, what are the ways in which that I am seeking to be open, seeking to be aware, seeking to be in observation, and more so being in conversation with what is happening around me. And that's the thing that inspires, say, the poem. But the poem, honestly, the poetry, the words that are put down on a piece of paper are completely irrelevant. The poem is existing and is seeking to communicate itself to us whenever we open our eyes and step forward into our life. And it's irrelevant whether or not that poem actually takes shape inside of us with language and arrives on a page. The poem still exists. And that poem is this world around us, seeking to be in constant conversation with us. What might the world conspire with us? And that thing that the world is conspiring with us, I think largely sits with two purposes. One, for us to have a greater understanding of these mysteries inside of ourselves and a greater relationship with the humans that are experiencing the same conversation with the world around them. And how might those things be shared and passed between us? And so on that note, I wanted to share one more poem with y'all. It's called Things I Love. I think, as I said just now, it is of great importance to me to recognize the ways in which that which we find wonder in, what we find awe in, are things in which that we are able to find community in, find reciprocity in, find humanity in. And so what are the things that we are gathering to our hearts and thus then sharing with others? Things I love. The blues a night sky makes. The bowls it holds for the stars to shine inside of. The sound of a fire moving its tongue against the wood. Riding bicycles with friends. Learning of the lives of others. Getting to know our best and worst birthdays. I love a holy sunset which feels like a sky is praying to me. Praying to us, asking us to look at it and know the fierce colors which lay in its clouds, that even the sky needs but the right hour, the right person to look at it, to know what beauty it holds inside, just waiting to pour forth. I love the crows en masse. They're crossing inside this prayer, bunched together in their loudness at day's end, their flight looking like the sky breaking apart to spread itself further. I love it spreading further in order to come in closer, to see what we might arrive at, a wandering with intent. I love not making plans and making plans, scheming schemes, building the idea of an art like it was a boat that becomes bigger upon being greeted by the water it asks to touch its hull. How the ocean wants to hold us, but does not always know how. I love that even the ocean does not know things. Even the ocean struggles to move against its nature and in this way maybe become something more. I love colors, how they lay on us and hold us. When they make an object but a plane of their shade, the way they solid and smooth and spill and wash and pale or so deep. I love colors so much. How do I love a thing so much with no form, nothing to touch, simply is? Though is this not, I suppose, what all love is? Even an object holding our love is but a placeholder. I love writing love poems, more so the living of them. Love writing in ink a scrap of a note, even as my desk becomes flooded with scraps of notes, whether they say fuzzy rhythmic vocals, or a sunflower taught me a poem, or the emptiness a missing, or are simply measurements for my sleeves. When the sun lands on one spot, I love this. Eating fruit from a bush on the street, I love this. Hugging friends goodbye, even though I hate goodbyes. When full houses become empty, but for me, the piano. I love the piano. I love when someone plays the piano. When you didn't know they could play the piano. When they don't feel they know how to play the piano. But there they are in this soft quiet that kisses the two of you playing it. And my heart in this soft quiet is going from bud to bloom to petals on the floor in one breath. I love that people want to share things with each other, even when sometimes we do not know how to do this. Is this not too what love itself is? You sharing you, and me sharing me, and us sharing and being shared with each other, back and forth, for whatever length always may be. Thank you.
Thank you, Anise, and thank you for putting us in a poem, and showing us that we're in a poem, and maybe we're also in a song, and right now we're gonna hear some music before we have a conversation. TJ Cole is going to play for us. Welcome. So we have about 15 minutes to have a conversation, and one of the many things, I actually felt like there's a lot of just in being in sync with each other among you three. I know that you didn't all share your things before, so anyway, that was really cool to experience. And one of the things that stood out to me, I guess, is how, for all of you, there was a sense of like that awe, the practice of attention that you're talking about. It exists outside of the usual measures of utility or intentionality, is kind of how Anise talked about it. So these are, to some extent, useless behaviors in a good sense. And I'm just curious, though, when one of the obstacles, I think, for a lot of people, including young people in our society, is that the world seems so to put a heavy value on utility of all of your actions. I mean, I'm thinking of undergraduate students that I know, and it's just like you're too busy to do. So I wonder if you might talk about like how has your openness to awe and wonder, your receptivity as artists and writers, how has that, have you been able to practice that in the midst of a world that seems always to be asking us for the next useful thing? And whoever wants to, yeah.
Well, I'll just jump in. Is my mic on still? Yeah? Oh, good. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there's that rush to commodify everything. Our footsteps even. We can't just go for a walk. We need to get 10,000 steps, you know? But also our walks in the forest. What do we gain from a walk in the forest? Oh, better health, better imagination, lowers our blood pressure. We have to take, and claim. Or even as birders, how many birds can we name in a day? Like count it all up. And sometimes I think about this idea, we hear this line from Mary Oliver, a very famous line. She says, go outside, pay attention, and tell about it. And we all do that. But what if, and the really important part for me is taking time to leave that last part off. What if we go outside and pay attention and we don't tell about it? Because when we're telling, we're naming, we're placing our own narrative upon something that doesn't require our affirmation or our voice to make it valid. What if we just let it be? I heard Jane Goodall the other day say something, Saint Jane Goodall said, she said that she was in the woods and a fly landed on her arm. And she was so grateful in that moment that she didn't know the name of the fly. Because if she had just named it, that might have ended it. Like we do in Birdwood, we're like, oh, scarlet-thighed leaf tosser, know what that is, on to the next. And instead, she could, in that moment, see that this fly was, iridescent with blues, and it had these little feet, and, she just paused. And so that just witnessing, that just beholding. And then when we do that, we find that the richness of our voices come to us more fully, I think.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah.
That reminds me of, I was in the woods just a couple of days ago, and I came upon a fox that had found a little place in the sun, a little warm spot in the sun, and I guess it was so mesmerized with that it didn't run off. And I got really close to it. And the first thing that came into my mind was to take a picture of it.
Yes.
And then I thought, I will ruin this moment if I do that. Like all that happened in, half a second. And so I was so glad that I didn't take a picture of it. In some way, it's like I have it more vividly in my mind because I didn't take that picture. But it's like we're trained to, the whole culture is telling us to. And as a writer, one of the reasons I write is to preserve, but I think that will go into my writing in some way, even though I was able to have that personal moment, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
So it's like sometimes if you don't seek for something to serve you, it will end up serving you in a better way, circuitously or something.
Yeah.
I like that.
There's such a rush of the world to require us to commodify every engagement with ourselves, every engagement with people, with the world outside, you know, that the way that the culture has shifted to this direction to, maybe it hasn't shifted, it's probably always been a thing that we wrestle with, but, you know, the ways in which we wrestle with it now, you know, that, you know, wanting to capture something and preserve it and potentially like post a picture online, you know, post a video online, you know, and it's tricky because, you know, I think as humans both, you know, when we're seeking to engage with curiosity, there's an aspect of where it's very much with ourselves, and then there's this aspect where it's like, well, I want to have a shared experience with people, but it very easily moves over that into kind of like, let me take that experience and put this little box around it so I can like then offer exactly what it is. You know, I love what you were saying, Lyanda, about, you know, your friend not looking up the name of this fly, like just let me just engage with whatever this moment is, you know, and that's a you know, I know I have that ongoing conversation because like you mentioned, you know, as a writer, as an artist, you know, we're often seeking to kind of like, oh, how do I take this moment and preserve it? How do I take this moment and turn it into something else as opposed to just being alive in the moment?
Yeah, or how do I take it and put it on a line on my CV or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah. I do feel like young people are increasingly burdened with resume type requirement. You know, it's like you're always supposed to be every moment should be, I mean, you should be part of a club. I don't know if you high school kids know this, but you should be part of lots of clubs, you know, that are going on your resume and whatever, right? It's going to be exhausting for you and stuff. I feel like you know, we live in a world that doesn't actually, even the moment, even before preserving it, like there's something restful about what you just described too, about seeing that fox, right? Or even Jane Goodall seeing the fly. But we don't have a lot of value for rest, or for that kind of, it's not really disengagement. I mean, that's the irony too. It's actually more full engagement with life, right? So that you're seeing things not just instrumentally. Okay, so one of the themes that kind of ran through your talks too is that there is a connection between these practices of attention and our moral lives. So, Silas, for example, you said something about making art makes us better people. And you talked about literature and empathy and developing empathy. And I'm curious what you think might be the possibilities in our current moment, because we're reading less. You know, there's lots of, you know, you guys have given us an incredible list of the virtues of artistic and inspired engagement with the world. What do you see as some possibilities moving forward for us to maybe reclaim that or revitalize our connection to that broadly as a society? What can we do? What would you, maybe even just like a book that we need to read, you know? Any advice? Yeah.
Well, I think the first step is, you know, having conversations like this. I think that's probably how I learned to do those things, was by hearing other people talk about it, or, you know, being instructed about it. And of course, there's some self-discovery involved, but I think most of those things I was shaped by wiser people, you know, and listening to them. So just talking about it goes a long way, I think. And also not being judgmental about it in the talking about it, you know. To some degree, there's a great privilege in being able to take a long walk in the woods. Not everybody's able to do that, you know. And so I'm on sabbatical right now, and I found that the best thing about sabbatical is that I have so much time to walk in the woods with my dog. That's like my favorite thing about sabbatical. Yep. Going into it, I thought it was going to be, you know, that I have more time to write. And of course, that's great. But just having that luxury, you know.
I think that, you know, one of the things that I think about with regards to kind of building an engagement with art is, you know, kind of returns back to what we were just talking about of, you know, that challenge of trying to quantify everything. I think it's really important to write without purpose, to paint without purpose, to walk without purpose, and even if it's just sort of like that, for the sake of what the shape of our lives may be, if we're, unfortunately required to kind of like, all right, I have 20 minutes, I have an hour, that it has to be within some sort of time constrained vessel, but within that vessel that it's not seeking to, I'm going to write a poem that I'm going to share with somebody, I'm going to write a poem and I'm going to delete it. I'm going to record a song into my phone and no one will ever hear it. I'll never listen to it again, I think trying to, at least for me, trying to remind myself to have those types of endeavors. Let me leave the house and just walk, and maybe let me leave my phone on my desk. And maybe I'll see a fox in the woods and I'll think I should have brought my phone, but what that's doing for me, not having that is far larger of an impact.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to just hop on board with the leaving the devices behind, because we know how deeply they're affecting and fragmenting our attention and our ability to even read when we have a book. Guys, I'm so embarrassed. The other day I was reading a book, it's just a novel, and in the middle of the page, without even thinking about it, I set it down. It wasn't even the end of a chapter. And I picked up my phone. I had that restlessness. And I thought, what am I doing? So they really, we know this, right? My daughter was in college and she called me one day and she said, Mom, she'd read the studies about how even having the phone in your room makes you less attentive and more anxious and unable to access that kind of, witness that we're talking about here, a source of creativity. And she said, but I don't know what to do because I have to get to rehearsal and blah, blah, blah. And I said, Claire, there's this fascinating new technology for that. She said, what is it? And I said, it's a wristwatch. And she asked for one for her birthday and started a little movement at Vassar. But it's really true. So leaving it behind, it makes us restless at first. And that's just a signal that, how much our peace is being interrupted, but we need to reclaim it. I mean, when you said, what do we do? Fearlessly reclaim our attention, beginning with really trying to sever our dependence on those devices.
And it can be in really small ways, I think. I'm not currently wearing a wristwatch because the battery died and I haven't kind of replaced it yet. But there's a period where, just sort of pulling my phone out to check the time, then I end up 10 minutes in, 15 minutes in into something else that was not my intent.
But something really cool.
But something very cool and very needed. But, just sort of having a timepiece here where as opposed to engaging with my phone, cut down on that immensely.
Recommend the watch. Try the wristwatch, not the Apple Watch.
So we have about 2 minutes, and I do want to ask about the animal thing. Silas, you really highlighted it. I think there's an interesting, we've come through a modern history where our sense of the religious and the holy has become very separate from the material. And all of you in various ways have really talked about holiness, either through, by referring to Merton or, referring to getting off of the trodden path as actually a lot more connected to the physical and the material. And, so what do you think keeps us from embracing our animal selves? Or what would you recommend if there is something that's keeping us from doing that? To, what's a practice that you could suggest to people to just remember that you're a mammal and you have these sensory capacities, right? How can we do that?
To me, it's just, intentionality. And again, I think there's just a real correlation between heightening your senses and also thinking that everything that is holy. Mm-hmm. And to me, adopting those two mantras into my life was life-changing for me. Mm-hmm. And it did allow me to gain empathy. to walk through the world thinking like that. It makes you pause and think, somebody cuts you off in traffic or whatever, and then you think, oh, they're holy, you don't. Flip them off, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's better for everybody,
Yeah, absolutely.
And so that is a practice that I really recommend to just, the more you intentionally think that, then it just becomes organic part of your day.
Love that. Yeah.
Two things come to mind, which is one, for me, trying to hold what I feel is the truth, that very often we see humanity as being something that is coexisting with the natural world as opposed to part of it, and whether that's like the destruction of that natural world, or whether even it's the conserving of it, I have to take care of this thing, as opposed to recognizing I'm taking care of myself when I'm taking care of this, that there's not a delineation between the two. And so that welcomes the animal of me, and I think also, like Silas said, heightening those senses. And one of those senses heightening for me is to I give the space to my brain far too much, give the space to my heart a little less, and give space to my body probably least of all, And so seeking to kind of let my body take up more space at my own table, If you are hungry, Anise, eat. If you are tired, Anise, rest. Just giving permission to sort of hey, it needs to do things as well, just like these two things do.
Yeah, that's great.
I know we're out of time, but I just want to put forth moderation is important too. Don't beat yourself up when you fail, when when you do lay on the horn at somebody.
Thank you. I was feeling pretty bad.
We're not saints or monsters,
No, I always think, if we had to do religious ethics behind the wheel, boy, we'd be discouraged.
One thing I'll just say about this animal knowing is I try to remember in the world that we are so prone to measuring other animals' ways of knowing and intelligence by our own yardstick. If they make vocalizations that we can think of as language, oh, they're smart. Or they can recognize faces, oh, they're smart. But there's an infinity of animal intelligence and ways of knowing that, that are beyond our capacities. Earthworms learn with their skin, and starlings are tuned to sound, and all these things that are just beyond us. And I love thinking about that and wandering through the world. And I know this is a weird one, but try this sometime. If you're in the presence of, a deer or a chickadee or a robin or a crow or a raven, try imitating it. Try taking on the posture and maybe the gaze and how it's seeing the world. It can really, it's fun, and it's modeling eccentricity, which we need to do for one another. And I think we learn something, and then the next time you see that creature, you're like, oh, I know something.
I love that. Let's thank our panelists for their wonderful wisdom.